Welcome back, everybody, to the Bucs Planet podcast. And, I actually did what I said, which is honestly might be a first on the show, where I said I'm going to make an episode on this day and then actually do it. I don't think I've always said that and then I've never done it. But here it is. Here it is. And I'm actually recording this on Thursday. And you people aren't even going to see it until Friday, which is tomorrow from now. So I actually even recorded it before I said I'd record it. So kudos to myself. I mean, okay, all kidding aside, we're going to talk about the Bucs playoff game against the Washington football team on Saturday night. And I watched an extensive amount of film on the Washington football team throughout this week, and I even had classes on Wednesday, and I knew where my priorities were. I knew where my priorities were: football, school. And I was able to watch, a lot of film, and I've determined a couple of things. I've determined a few things, and the Bucs obviously could easily win this game, and they also could easily lose this game. I mean, not easily, but they could lose this game. But that would obviously be embarrassing, and I'll tell you why that this is actually an easier game. And I hate to say this. I really do, especially when it comes to us. This is actually an easier game than I think even people thought it was, and people already thought this would be a pretty easy game. So what do I mean by that? What do I mean by that? Well, I'll explain. People keep saying that the Bucs offense and then the Washington defense that's ranked, I think, third overall in the NFL, and how it's a bad matchup, right? Because they have a good defensive line, we have trouble picking up blitzes, they cover really well, and how it's a bad matchup for our offense. It's actually not true. They actually kind of, in my opinion, they actually play into our cards more. Because a Ron Rivera coach defense, who's the head coach of Washington, who was formerly the head coach of the Panthers, who we played for, I mean, how long was he with the Panthers? 7, 8 years? And we played him a ton of times. And Ron Rivera defenses, because he's a defensive-minded head coach, used to be a defensive coordinator, they always play zone defense. That's their identity. Every single Ron Rivera coach defense, they will always only play, well, not only, but they'll mostly always play zone defense instead of man coverage. And this helps us more, actually, because you would think, normally when you're like, we have an offense, Mike Evans, who we don't know if he's going to play. I'm going to talk about that. Antonio Brown, Chris Godwin, Rob Gronkowski, all those guys. And you would think, oh, well, we're gonna be good against man because they're gonna have a cornerback 3 on Antonio Brown or Chris Godwin, so they obviously are better against man. And we're actually not. It's kind of weird. We're definitely better against zone, and that's mostly because Tom Brady, I mean, has made a living literally off of picking apart zone defenses. That's all. I mean, that's his main. If you can remember one thing about Tom Brady, he destroys zone defenses, and Washington sitting in zones will actually help us tremendously. It's a good matchup. And not only that is, Tom Brady's playing really well against zones specifically. And it's funny, a lot of people have been lately, they're like, "Oh, well, like Byron Leftwich, like now he's starting to call, our offense is good." Like, is he good again? Like, what's up with the play calling? And the play calling actually, because I looked at some of our old games too, and play calling's not different. Play calling's actually exactly the same. Tom Brady is playing better now than he was then. Tom Brady was not playing well earlier. He wasn't. I mean, there was a specific play when I rewatched the Vikings game a couple days ago where Chris Godwin is wide open in zone coverage and he made the right read. Technically he actually had another guy open for a touchdown, but Chris Godwin was wide open too and he misses the throw. And he kept doing little things like that or making the wrong reads. And a lot of that was, being in a new system, I understand. And he just wasn't playing that well. Tom Brady was not playing that well when I said he wasn't playing that well earlier. And it's the play calling, the adjustments, there really hasn't been any offensive adjustments. It's just Tom Brady's playing better. So our offense is, better, which is good. That's what we want. So the coaching staff just had a lot of trust in Tom Brady that he would get those corrections fixed before, when, it came time to, like, this is it, we need to fix them, right? And he has the last 2 weeks. I understand the defenses have been bad. I understand. But if you look at some of the throws he's making against, okay, they're bad defenses, but the coverage is still good. The throw to Chris Godwin for a touchdown where Chris Godwin catches it with one hand and the linebackers on him, that was great coverage. That was fantastic coverage. And Brady threw a perfect pass, and Chris Godwin is a fantastic receiver, and he caught the ball with one hand. So it's just a good play. And so, but then you'll look and say, oh, Atlanta's bad defense. Well, that was great coverage on that play. It was a great throw. You can't just discredit it. And the same can be said against, the Lions. Well, actually, yeah, I mean, there's a lot more wide open receivers in that game, but it still takes skill to, carve up an NFL defense. And he's just been making fantastic reads. They really, I mean, fantastic. Remember, his only interception last week wasn't his fault. Scotty Miller bobbled the pass, fell down, bounced off his arm into, hands of the defender. Obviously not Tom Brady's fault. But here's the point, basically. Tom Brady's playing better, and we're carving up zone defenses, and that's all Washington does. So that, from that aspect, we're pretty solid. They are literally playing into our cards. Now, here's the thing about that, though. Washington executes zone defense, maybe the best in the league. They might be the best team in, this is a really aggressive statement, but it's actually true if you watch the film. They probably execute zone defense the best out of any defense in the league, which I'm not surprised with. Ron Rivera is a good coach. He knows how to coach a defense, and they execute it really well, and their players aren't even that talented on defense, but outside of their defensive line. Their secondary is not super talented. Their cornerbacks, right, for the most part. Not super talented, but they execute zone coverage perfectly. And it's ironic because if you compare that to the Bucs defense, we're really talented, but we don't know how to execute zone coverage that good, which I always think that's interesting because the secondary in Washington has so much less talent, but yet they're better than our secondary because they have higher football IQ. It is always the scheme. It's always the scheme over untapped potential all the time. But anyways, it's not that Washington is necessarily perfect on defense, but they make everything so hard. It's not easy. They don't really, the mistakes on their defense are few and far between, to say the least. They'll make maybe one mistake a game, maybe. And even then, it's not going to be a colossal mistake. It'll just maybe be a gain of 15 or 20. That'll be their biggest mistake. We can beat Washington by just being a better football team than them, as in, we have better players, which is the case. But we cannot rely on their defense making mistakes because they really don't ever. In fact, it's so good that I was actually really impressed. I kind of liked watching it. I was like, I watched so much film on the Bucs. I don't really, watch that much of other teams on film specifically. And then I was watching, I was like, this is like a well-executed zone defense. They have awareness. They know how to pass off defenders. They know how to do everything correctly. Their technique is great. And it was kind of fun to watch. I was like, wow, I've never seen this before. We still can't even do that. And, I mean, there was a couple throws. I went back and I watched the film on the Steelers versus Washington game. And, there was plays where, Ben Roethlisberger would complete the pass, but the coverage was, they make it to where you have to make a perfect throw. That's what they do, because zone defense, there will always be holes. There will always be holes. No matter how, even if you do it perfectly, there will always be holes. But they make sure that those holes, those windows in the coverage are so small that you have to make a perfect throw into it, which I trust in Tom Brady to do at least more than half the time. But in general, it's just they just make it hard. You can't just sit back there and say, oh, there's just this wide open hole. Boom. You kind of have to sit there and be like, kind of zig it in there and make sure it's accurate and perfect. Because it's not easy against them. It's not easy. But here, so again, from that perspective, the Bucs offense versus the Washington defense, that is a super overrated statement that people keep making in the media who don't watch film, who don't know what they're talking about. And honestly, that was me literally 5 days ago because I didn't really understand. And then, you watch the film and you understand, oh, well, actually, this plays into our cards more than it did otherwise. And now I'm just talking from a literal football perspective of our offensive style versus their defensive game plan, right? So that's that. But here is the X factor where people do have a point, and something that I point out too is their defensive line is really good. And this is the X factor in the game, I believe. And again, people in the media don't understand anything, and half of you guys. And I was watching the film, and we understand that, and I even didn't even know this before, just because sometimes you get caught up in the media, and you're like, oh, like, people keep talking about this player, and he must be good, and that's and then you're like, oh, he's good, but then you actually watch the film, you're like, oh, like, he's just genuinely not that impressive, and he just gets overhyped by the media because of either a high draft pick or his physical, attributes, and that happens all the time, and people don't notice. That's okay, because I notice it, and we go ahead and talk about that on the show. So Chase Young, if you just watch the media, you would think that he's the best player maybe of all time and that he's the best. Let me explain something about Chase Young. Chase Young is good, and I will say that. He is a good football player. But he is not great. And he is not even close to their best pass rusher. Not even close. Montez Sweat is by far their best pass rusher. And if you don't believe me, if you say, wow, like that is a horrendous take, go watch film. Go look at the stats. This is not an opinion. Montez Sweat is significantly better than Chase Young. That's just a literal fact. I want Chase Young on Donovan Smith the whole game so Tristan Wirfs can block Montez Sweat. That's what I want. And that doesn't mean that Donovan Smith won't get beat by Chase Young, because I'm sure he'll find a way to do that. But Montez Sweat is better than Chase Young. Montez Sweat, let's just look from a statistical perspective, has more sacks, has more tackles for loss, has more combined tackles, has more assisted tackles, has more solo tackles. Just because Chase Young was picked number 2 and recovered a fumble for a touchdown does not mean he's the best defensive end in the league. You have to understand this. Please understand that. Chase Young had 7.5 sacks this year. That's not that's okay. That's pretty good. Nice. That's a solid average season. 7.5 sacks. Montez Sweat had 10. That's a good season. If you're in the double digits category, that's really good. That's what Montez Sweat did, because he's their best pass rusher, but no one talks about him. Do you know why? Because he wasn't picked number 2 overall. He wasn't considered a transcendent pass rusher, which Chase Young could be. It's just he's not now. He's not even their best defensive end on the football team. I'm worried about Montez Sweat because, I trust in the coaching staff to identify that Montez Sweat is the problem, not Chase Young. And I understand they both complement each other, but make no, mistake about it. Montez Sweat is the one. Chase Young is number 2. When there's a Batman and a Robin, if we're talking about right now for this playoff game, Montez Sweat is Batman, Chase Young is Robin. Do not overhype Chase Young and do not over game plan for him and forget about Montez Sweat just because not a lot of people talk about him. Montez Sweat is the problem. And I know, I feel like I have to keep saying this because you guys will just, comment, oh, because if Chase Young has a big game, they'll be like, oh, like you look like an idiot. Doesn't mean he can't have a big game. He could, he could get multiple sacks and a strip sack. I don't know. He could. I'm just saying that Montez Sweat is better than him. Like, that's just true. And that's the person that we should be worried about more so. Chase Young's good, but he's not great. And we have to worry about Montez Sweat. That's just That's just a factual statement. It's non-negotiable. Like, he's just better. Montez Sweat is very good. Chase Young's good. Montez Sweat is very good. He's an elite pass rusher. Now, I will say this about their offense. Alex Smith is 4-1 with the Washington football team this year. And that's something to be said because the record's 7-9, but that's a lot of Dwayne Haskins and he sucks. He sucks and he's not even on the team anymore. And we're not playing Dwayne Haskins and we're not playing Kyle Allen, who also is not that good, even though he blew us out last year, and we know how that goes. We know how that goes in London, the freaking international embarrassment. We're not playing Kyle Allen. We're not playing Dwayne Haskins. We're playing Alex Smith, who's 4-1. Bruce Arians even said it the other day. We're not playing a 7-9 football team. We're playing a 4-1 football team. Alex Smith is 4-1 with the football team. And that's something that we need to be aware of. Alex Smith is a game manager, obviously. He's been beaten up. He obviously, the whole leg thing, we understand. And he doesn't have a great running game. Antonio Gibson's like, okay. It's like, all right, like, cool. Terry McLaurin's good, but he's pretty much their only weapon. And, from a receiving standpoint, now Logan Thomas, their tight end's pretty good. But, again, tight end, he's not amazing. He's a pretty good tight end. So I'm not super worried about their offense. It honestly just 100% depends on how good the game plan is, because Alex Smith could pick us apart easily by doing the dink and dunk stuff if we let him do it. Hopefully we don't let him do it, but he easily could if he wanted to. I would say easily the defense. So offensive game plan. Make sure to keep their defensive line in check. Right? Pick up the blitzes. Block Montez Sweat. Block Chase Young. Block everybody. And make sure that we're executing their zone coverage correctly. Meaning, we need to be able to make tight throws. Everyone needs to be on the same page of what coverage they're in. We need to call good plays that are good zone beaters, like the one against Atlanta, where Chris Godwin caught a 40-yard touchdown. That was a great zone beater. We motioned Chris Godwin, forced the linebacker to be one-on-one with Chris Godwin. He still had great coverage, and but we're better. Chris Godwin on a linebacker. Come on now. Do stuff like that. So here's the two keys on offense to beat their defense. Keep the D line, number one, keep the defensive line in check. Got to keep them in check. Number two, Brady has to make the tight window throws. Has to do it. And then if there's a third thing, it would obviously be good play calling against zone defense, right? So there's that. And obviously, and there's a lot of other, those are the three main things in my opinion. And obviously you have to have a good running game. Like, these are things I just don't have to say, but as people in the comments are like, oh, you didn't say they have to run the ball. I mean, that should just go unsaid. You always have to run the ball, but so that's obviously in there. But again, two main things: keep the D line in check, make tight window throws. And if Washington does make a mistake, you have to take advantage of it because they don't do it often. On defense, the two keys are, the first one being, make sure to call a lot of press man coverage and force Alex Smith to make down the field throws that are beyond 10 to 15 yards. Force him to make a 15-yard throw. That's in a tight window. Force him to make a 20-yard throw on the money. Make sure that all the stuff underneath is just clamped, it's covered, it's blanketed, whatever you want to call it. Make sure it's all there and force him to throw the ball deep accurately. In a sense, kind of put the ball in his court, basically. Because I don't know if he can. I really don't know if he can. And, I have a tremendous amount of respect for him for what he came back, but, we need to beat him, and I'm not sure if he can make all those throws down the field. So put the ball in his court if he can. What we do, go into halftime, adjust, kind of do our thing, and we'll adjust how they see fit if he actually is shredding us down the field. But I don't believe that'll be the case. So again, press man, get hands on receivers, force him to throw the ball down the field. That would be the main key. And the second thing is you have to get a pass rush. And I understand this is like super basic. But this is why the pass rush is, honestly, it's going to be more helpful against Alex Smith than maybe, anyone else as of right now, because with Alex Smith's injury, I'm not saying that he's afraid of a pass rush, but it's definitely a little bit still in him to kind of, be a little hesitant. And he's shown that he's gotten a little happy feet a little bit at times. This was in the beginning. He hasn't done that lately, but you never know. Playoff football, big Ndamukong Suh in there. I don't think he's going to want to, mess around with that guy. And if you get a lot of pressure on Alex Smith, especially for what this is like, honestly, really sad to say, but with all he's been through, with this whole leg that almost got amputated literally from getting sacked, um, or hit. I can't remember if he was sacked or he ran and got hit, and I think he was sacked. And that's pretty traumatizing. So if you get a lot of pressure on him, he's probably going to be a little worried. So that's what we need to be doing. And we don't have Devin White, our best blitzing, linebacker, but we still have Levante David. Kevin Minter is not that good. I'm not going to say anything actually. Maybe he can get a sack. I don't know. But they need to keep the pass. The pass rush needs to get there on time because if he has a lot of time, he will dink and dunk. He will do it. He'll have time. Receivers, even if you cover all this stuff and make sure he can't dink and dunk, he'll still be able to do it because eventually receivers are still going to get open because that's just how that works. You have to generate pass rush. So, again, defensive game plan or the two keys for the defense. Force Alex Smith to throw the ball downfield, cover all the stuff underneath, right? Number two, get a good pass rush to freak out Alex Smith and make him, make bad decisions, throw away the ball early, stuff like that. And then offense, obviously, just to say this one more time, is to make sure to make tight window throws and to keep their defensive line in check. I said that backwards. So keep their defensive line in check and make tight window throws into zone coverage. And then obviously the play calling. So those are the keys. Those are the keys for the Bucs to win this football game. I've wanted to make this podcast for so long about a playoff preview. We finally have done it. I made sure it was short because you guys had a lot of, I made one on Monday, made a podcast on Monday or something. And then, my other podcast called, what's it called? I think it's called Bro Talk with Hank and Neely. I think that's what it's called. And you guys got to be listening to that with Henry Politz, great guy. And now I have this. So you guys have work to do, and you need to be listening. And this was a lot of fun to make. And, yeah, I'm very nervous for this game, even though we should win, right? And, knock on wood, my desk is wood, so I was able to do that. And, yeah, just this game's going to be intense. It's going to be hard fought. But the Bucs need to win this to not get clowned because if you lose the winner of the NFC East, who has a record of 7-9, that's not good. But with the keys that I described, they should be able to do it if they do those things. And with that being said, make sure to watch the game on Saturday and go Bucs.